Terima kasih. Hadirin yang kami muliakan, untuk kelancaran dan keberkahan acara seminar, debat, dan penjurian, serta akreditasi juri National University Debating Championship tahun 2023 pada pagi hari ini, marilah kita memanjatkan doa kehadirat Tuhan Yang Maha Esa sesuai dengan keyakinan kita masing-masing. Berdoa dimulai. Amin ya rabbal alamin. Berdoa saja. Acara selanjutnya, yakni laporan kegiatan yang akan disampaikan oleh Subkoordinator Ajang Talenta Bidang Seni dan Budaya, Balai Pengembangan Talenta Indonesia. Kepada Ibu Fonda Ambitasari, kami persilakan.
Baik, terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Suara saya terdengar jelas, Mbak Farah?
Jelas, Bu.
Iya, terima kasih. Baik, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Pertama-tama yang kami hormati Kepala Balai Pengembangan Talenta Indonesia yang dalam kesempatan ini diwakili oleh Koordinator Bidang Seni Budaya dan Literasi, Bapak Keri Darwindo. Yang kami hormati Wakil Lembaga Perguruan Tinggi dan Wakil dari Perguruan Tinggi Negeri dan Swasta di seluruh Indonesia. Yang kami hormati para Wakil N1 dan pembina tingkat nasional untuk National University Debating Championship. Dan yang kami hormati Bapak dan Ibu panitia dari Balai Pengembangan Talenta Indonesia, serta yang kami banggakan, para peserta seminar debat dan akreditasi National University Debating Championship. Bapak dan Ibu yang kami hormati, izinkan kami melaporkan kegiatan pada hari ini. Seminar debat dan akreditasi juri NUDC tahun 2023 bertujuan untuk menginformasikan peserta tentang konsep debat dan penjurian pada NUDC tahun 2023. Kemudian yang kedua, kegiatan seminar debat dan akreditasi juri NUDC tahun 2023 ini bertujuan untuk mengakreditasi juri institusi ataupun juri N1 sebagai dasar untuk mendistribusikan peran sebagai juri pada pelaksanaan NUDC tahun 2023. Yang ketiga, yaitu kegiatan ini bertujuan memberikan informasi data terkait akreditasi juri, institusi, dan mengkader juri, institusi dalam perannya sebagai juri inti dan juri undangan di pelaksanaan NUDC tahun berikutnya. Bapak Koordinator yang kami hormati, kami laporkan bahwa kegiatan seminar debat dan akreditasi juri NUDC dilaksanakan pada tanggal 16 April tahun 2023 yang akan dilaksanakan pada hari ini, mulai pukul 9.30 sampai dengan pukul 17 waktu Indonesia bagian Barat. Kegiatan seminar ini diikuti oleh 439 tim dengan masing-masing tim terdiri dari 2 orang dan 439 orang sebagai N1 yang terdiri dari beberapa universitas negeri dan swasta di seluruh Indonesia. Bapak Koordinator yang kami hormati, dalam kegiatan ini meliputi beberapa rangkaian, yaitu yang pertama, debate seminar, kemudian adjudication seminar, TAP atau technical briefing, dan adjudicator accreditation text. Dan pada kesempatan ini juga, kegiatan seminar dan akreditasi juri juga dilaksanakan dengan melibatkan narasumber yang terdiri dari narasumber dari perguruan tinggi negeri dan swasta yang bekerja sama dengan Balai Pengembangan Talenta Indonesia di tahun 2023 ini. Bapak Koordinator yang kami hormati, kami informasikan dan kami laporkan bahwa pelaksanaan National University Debating Championship tahun 2023 sekiranya akan dilaksanakan pada bulan Juni tahun 2023. Dan sebelum melaksanakan kegiatan NUDC tahun 2023 akan dilaksanakan seleksi wilayah yang terbagi menjadi 7 wilayah di seluruh Indonesia. Bapak dan Ibu, serta Bapak Koordinator, kami laporkan bahwa para peserta NUDC tahun 2023 nantinya pada kegiatan ini akan dibina dan dipersiapkan untuk mengikuti kejuaraan debat. Mohon maaf, para peserta juara NUDC tahun 2023 nantinya akan dibina dan dipersiapkan untuk mengikuti kejuaraan debat tingkat internasional atau yang lebih dikenal dengan World University Debating Championship. Demikianlah laporan yang bisa kami sampaikan. Mohon kiranya kepada Bapak Koordinator Bidang Seni, Budaya, dan Literasi, Bapak Keri Darwindo, berkenan membuka dan memberikan arahan pada acara pembukaan seminar dan akreditasi juri National University Debating Championship tahun 2023. Lebih dan kurangnya kami mohon maaf. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Kami ucapkan terima kasih kepada Ibu Fonda Amritasari atas penyampaian laporan kegiatan pelaksanaan seminar debat dan penjurian serta akreditasi juri National University Debating Championship tahun 2023. Acara berikutnya, hadirin sekalian, yakni arahan dan sambutan dari Kepala Balai Pengembangan Talenta Indonesia yang dalam kesempatan kali ini diwakili oleh Koordinator Ajang Talenta Bidang Seni, Budaya, dan Olahraga Balai Pengembangan Talenta Indonesia, yang sekaligus beliau akan membuka kegiatan ini secara resmi. Kepada Bapak Keri Darwindo, kami persilakan.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi. Salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Yang saya hormati Bu Fonda, penanggung jawab bidang seni budaya. Yang saya hormati para juri seminar debat dan akreditasi penjurian, para peserta seminar maupun calon juri, teman-teman dari BPTI yang saya banggakan. Alhamdulillah, puji syukur kepada Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, karena pada pagi hari ini kita senantiasa selalu mendapatkan rahmat dan hidayahnya. Karena atas rahmat dan hidayahnya kita dapat mengikuti kegiatan seminar, debat, dan akreditasi penjurian NUDC tahun 2023. Bapak dan Ibu juri dan para peserta, kegiatan seminar ini tentu saja sangat penting. Karena apa? Karena dengan kegiatan ini kita mengawali persiapan nanti yang akan kita lakukan pada saat kita nanti melakukan seleksi, maupun juga pada tahap nanti kita melakukan NUDC di tingkat nasional. Nah, tentu saja kegiatan ini saya berpikir sangat baik ya, karena dengan seminar dan terutama akreditasi penjurian, maka kita akan mempunyai juri-juri di bidang debat yang selama ini juri-juri itu mungkin sangat terbatas jumlahnya. Nah, mungkin dengan kegiatan ini ya diharapkan nanti para peserta yang akan diakreditasi nanti memiliki kemampuan tentu saja di dalam penjurian di debating. Nah, ini akan membantu BPTI di dalam melaksanakan kegiatan debat di tahun-tahun berikutnya. Nah, tak lupa kami juga mengucapkan kepada para narasumber dan juri yang nanti akan memberikan informasi, yang akan memberikan materi dan penilaian ya, terhadap calon juri. Ya, semoga para narasumber, para juri dapat memberikan materi semaksimal mungkin sehingga dapat menularkan ilmunya ke teman-teman calon juri debat di NUDC ini. Baik Bapak dan Ibu, mungkin itu yang dapat kami sampaikan, dan sekali lagi selamat beraktivitas melakukan seminar dan akreditasi penjurian. Salam sehat. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Kami ucapkan terima kasih kepada Bapak Keri Darwindo atas arahan dan dibukanya kegiatan ini secara resmi. Hadirin Bapak Ibu, rekan-rekan sobat prestasi semuanya, memasuki acara inti seminar, debat, dan penjurian serta akreditasi juri National University Debating Championship tahun 2023. Maka untuk selanjutnya saya serahkan kepada Bapak Rahmat Nur Cahyo. Saya persilakan.
Terima kasih Mbak Farah. Suara saya bisa terdengar dengan jelas?
Jelas sekali Pak, terima kasih.
Thank you. Pak Koordinator, Bapak Keri, Ibu Honda, Bu Subkoordinator, dan teman-teman di BPTI semua, teman-teman debaters dan juri N1, pertama-tama kami mengucapkan terima kasih. Saya akan langsung saja ke materi acara kita kali ini. Saya akan mengantarkan beberapa hal poin yang perlu teman-teman ketahui. Yang pertama, seminar dan akreditasi penjurian ini adalah bagian dari akreditasi penjurian. Dalam sehari nanti teman-teman akan mendapatkan materi baik itu protokol debat maupun protokol penjurian, termasuk judge test yang pertama untuk para N1 adjudicators. Sebenarnya akreditasi ini adalah kegiatan yang lebih komprehensif, terstruktur, beserta dengan kompetensi teman-teman yang diuji di lomba nanti. Jadi N1 judge bahwa hari ini itu ada judge test, tetapi sebenarnya akreditasi secara menyeluruh adalah dengan menempatkan teman-teman di ruang-ruang debat, sehingga di perdebatan nanti teman-teman akan mendapatkan pengalaman dan juga penilaian dari tim juri inti. Pertama, saya akan memperkenalkan beberapa juri inti yang kami sebut sebagai CAP, yang sudah bekerja ekstra keras menyiapkan ini semua. Di dalam Zoom ini sudah ada beberapa. Mungkin yang pertama saya sampaikan ada Bapak Tengku Omar atau Mas Tengku Omar. Beliau dari alumni dari Unpad dan alumni dari Columbia University. Yang kedua ada Mbak Deta, alumni dari Universitas Indonesia yang dulu juga debaters. Prestasi tertinggi adalah grand finalis di kategori ESL di WUDC di Yunani. Kemudian ada Mas Leonardus Hans dari ITB yang cukup terkenal akhir-akhir ini karena berhasil menjadi semifinalis kategori ESL di WUDC 2 tahun berturut-turut. Dan juga ada Mas Batara Bina Nusantara yang menjuarai beberapa lomba debat internasional di Asia dan di WUDC juga. Dan yang terakhir ada Mbak Feliani dari Universitas Tanjung Pura. Beliau champion NUDC 2 tahun yang lalu. Jadi bersama dengan kami tim pembina, penyiapan akreditasi dan seminar ini merupakan kerja yang sangat keras karena kita sedang dihadapkan pada satu posisi kita tidak bisa bertemu dulu. Kami sangat berterima kasih kepada BPTI, Pak Keri, Bu Honda, Mbak Farah, dan teman-teman yang memfasilitasi semuanya sehingga hari ini kita bisa melaksanakannya. to all and judge, jangan sampai ketinggalan akreditasinya, terutama judge stage-nya. Hari ini Mas Omar dan kawan-kawan akan menyampaikan lebih dalam, baik itu melalui seminarnya. Ada 2 jenis seminar, seminar on debating and seminar on adjudicating, dan satu lagi akreditasi juri. Kami juga akan bekerja keras juga sebelum nanti teman-teman melaksanakan seleksi di tingkat wilayah, maka semua hasil dari akreditasi judge test yang hari ini kita lakukan harus selesai. Jika memang ada pertanyaan lebih lanjut, I'm happy to answer that. Ada Bu Dora dan Pak Nyoman yang juga bekerja dengan teman-teman. Sekali lagi, Pak Kerry, terima kasih Pak sudah memfasilitasi teman-teman juga dalam Zoom ini sehingga kita bisa berinteraksi. Semoga semua lomba, tahapan lomba di NUDC ini akan berjalan dengan lancar. Seperti yang ditanyakan banyak debaters di komunitas lewat Jabri ke saya, apakah tahun ini akan mengirimkan ke tingkat internasional? Jadi Puspersnas, bagian dari Puspersnas adalah BPTI, yang mengurusi tingkat internasional itu Puspersnas, dan kita sudah mendaftarkan 4 tim untuk bisa berlaga di WDC yang akan kita ambil nanti dari para juara di NUDC tingkat nasional. Demikian yang bisa saya antarkan. Mungkin langsung saya kembalikan, saya berikan kepada Mas Omar yang akan membawakan seminar pertama. Mas Omar.
Halo, pagi Pak Rahmat.
Thank you Mas Omar. The floor is yours.
Thank you Pak Rahmat. Untuk opening, kita sudah bagi-bagi tugas dan Mbak Deta akan menyampaikan opening dahulu. Jadi saya menyerahkan kepada Mbak Deta. Silakan Mbak Deta.
Halo, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Hari ini kami mau menyampaikan terima kasih dulu kepada Bapak Gary Darwindo sebagai Koordinator Ajang Talenta Badan Pengembangan Talenta Indonesia, BPTI. Kami juga mau menyampaikan terima kasih kepada Ibu Fonda Mitasari sebagai penanggung jawab bidang seni dan budaya BPTI, serta para peserta seminar dan akreditasi. Selamat datang dan semoga bisa mendapatkan ilmu yang bermanfaat untuk menjadi juri di ajang NUDC 2023 ini. Hari ini, tadi seperti yang sudah diperkenalkan oleh Pak Rahmat, tim dari kepala juri ini terdiri dari Omar, Batara, Hans, Feli, dan Deta, yang nanti sepanjang acara akan terus juga memberikan informasi dan membantu semuanya untuk bisa mendapatkan hasil yang terbaik dari akreditasi ini. Dan seperti yang tadi Pak Rahmat sudah sampaikan, bahwasannya di hari ini hasil yang didapatkan atau hasil dari tes yang nanti dijalankan oleh seluruh peserta itu bukan menjadi hasil akreditasi akhir, namun itu akan menjadi salah satu acuan yang mana nanti akan ditambahkan dan dijumlahkan dengan penilaian dari hasil menjadi juri setiap ronde selama kegiatan NUDC berlangsung. Jadi mohon untuk tidak berpatah semangat atau tidak merasa puas diri ketika sudah mendapatkan hasil di akreditasi hari ini, tapi itu akan menjadi satu kesatuan yang akan dinilai secara bersamaan di akhirnya. Jadi mohon untuk selalu memperhatikan setiap rangkaian acara yang nanti akan kita bawakan. Nah, hari ini nanti kita akan membagi presentasinya. Pertama nanti akan dimulai dengan debate seminar yang akan dipresentasikan oleh Feli dan Omar. Lalu nanti akan dilanjutkan dengan education seminar yang akan dibawakan oleh Hans dan Batara. Gitu. Jadi untuk mempersingkat waktu, kita akan langsung mulai dengan debate seminar yang akan dibawakan oleh Feli. Silakan Feli.
Halo, selamat pagi.
Pagi.
Baiklah teman-teman, mungkin karena kita akan langsung memulai dengan debate seminar, saya akan switch ke bahasa Inggris dan juga sambil mohon kesediaannya buat teman-teman, saya akan berbagi screen. All right, so everyone, good morning. As you have known, I hope we can see the screen. Yes. So here we're going to have the debate and judge brief, starting with the debate seminar first. So if you have seen that we have the CAP or Chief Educator, who are Batara, Deta, Feliani, Hans, and Omar. We will give credit to the following competition for the debate manual that we have created for all of the debaters, as well as for the judges as well, the N1, to know that there is some rules in the debating, especially British parliamentary debating for NUDC. So first of all, the debate brief will have several agenda. Number 1, general overview. Number 2, team roles. Number 3, speaker roles. 4, motion types. 5, definition. And the last one, how to score the judge. So in general overview, unlike any other parliamentary debating, British parliamentary have 4 teams. That's why in each team we will have 2 speakers. The first, we will have the opening government, who will act as Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, and then there will be opening opposition, leader of opposition, deputy leader of opposition, then we will have closing government and closing opposition. So the role will start with Prime Minister and then responded by leader of opposition, Deputy Prime Minister, Deputy Leader of Opposition, then the closing half with member of government starting first, and then member of opposition with government whip and close by the opposition whip. Next up, some debating rules that's specific in the BP. Number 1, it's going to be 7-minute speech. So there will be POIs given in minute 1 to minute 6. And it's very encouraged for all the debaters to give POI, and as well for the judges as well to mention that POI is one of the way for us to also judge the debate. The third thing is that all the motions are impromptu, meaning that there will be no motion being told in the beginning before the competition start. It will be announced 15 minutes before the round starts. And the most important part, debating is about the battle of logical prowess. So it's not about English skills only or about how well they are able to use all the good accent, whatever it is. And again, it's a 15-minute preparation time, and there shouldn't be any online browsing, internet whatsoever. But printed materials or something like notes written by the debaters are allowed to be used during the preparation time, but not during the speech. It's just only like the paper that they made by themselves before the debate start, and using that to deliver the 7-minute speech. Next up is the team roles. What actually the debaters have to do? Number 1, there are 3 burdens. The first is logical burden, meaning that it's important to elaborate the likelihood and impact of the argument. So is this argument true? And then what the factors that can help this argument to be more solid, and the impacts and why it's possible or likely to happen. And there are also motion-based burden. It means that the debaters have to address the key issues asked by the motion. Like, did you debate within the scope demanded by the motion or not? So you shouldn't like talk about something out of the motion, or even if it's out of the motion, you have to frame it in a way that it still pertain to what the motion asks you. Lastly, and the most important as well, because they're also a closing team, it's important to compare and frame, which means that there should be comparison between your argument and the other argument, with the other team's argument, because it's not only about delivering some argument and having points, but at the same time compare why these points are better and in what way this is more likely or more impactful to the actor that is mentioned by the teams. Next up, we'll have burdens. What is that actually? That is implied by the motion. So for example, we have the motion here. This House believes that new democracies should have laws restricting freedom of speech. Government teams, opening government and closing government, have the burden to explain why the laws in terms of restricting freedom of speech are crucial for new democracies to have. So new democracies might mean countries that is just coming out from authoritarian regime, or just establish the new democratic country. And then it doesn't mean that the government need to explain why such law should apply in all cases. Like all the democracy, whatever it is. So therefore, the government only have the burden to explain why it's crucial for the new democracies, because it's implied by the motion. Meanwhile, opposition teams need to demonstrate that the government teams are wrong, that new democracy should not have laws restricting freedom of speech. So opposition don't need to explain why new democracies should not have other laws that might be relevant to the characterizations of new democracies. So essentially, sometimes, definitely, some motions are having a complicated wording. That's why for the debaters, especially in the opening, they need to explain it in a more simplified way, or even in a way that is understandable for everyone, in the case that you will be able to share what is implied by the motion. Next up, notes on burden that is self-imposed, because there was like implied by the motion. Next up is self-imposed, which means you can use the same motion as the previous slide, but then as leader of opposition or opening opposition, you may initially argue that restriction of freedom of speech may result in a civil war. It wasn't mentioned that there will be civil war, but opposition believe it could cause civil war. So for this to be relevant in the debate, OO has the burden to show the process of how civil war happening, specifically because the existence of laws that restrict that freedom of speech. So in short, leader of opposition can run any argument how the motion will cause civil war in this example, and that means they require additional explanation or mechanization that we call that. The government teams can also choose to engage with that argument and thus have the burden to prove why a civil war is unlikely to happen by virtue of the laws being present. That's why, again, a debate is not only about sharing and delivering argument, but at the same time also engage and compare why that can happen or why that cannot happen, and in what way it could be impactful or not. Next, what are the don'ts? So first, don't argue irrelevant materials to the motion. So again, the motion have self-imposed burden, imposed burden, and at the same time self-imposed, but be sure to not argue irrelevant materials. Second, not elaborating ideas or claims. So it's important to state something, and at the same time, after that, directly discuss more in the elaboration, like giving example, also giving the lines of logic for the judges to understand. The third is being unresponsive, which includes not giving any rebuttals after the previous speaker has stopped speaking, and then also not giving POI at all, not doing anything like just because I have delivered my speech, that's it. No, the debate starts from the motion is being launched until the end of the oral adjudication. Fourth, not comparing or framing your team's identity in the debate. So comparison and framing is very important, because everyone can throw argument, but who will be able to explain it really clearly, as well as being able to compare to other teams, will get the better score. Last is not taking POIs in a closed debate. So it's very important for all debaters to give POI in minute 1 to minute 6, and then for each debater to also at least take one POI, so there will be engagement, especially for a very close debate. Next, the team role. So I have mentioned that there will be opening teams and then there will be closing teams. For the opening teams, it's very important for the speaker to start with the most important issues in the debate. So maybe talking about not only about the dictionary definition, like this house means who. No, this is, you can also directly discuss like this house. For example, the new democracy's refrain of freedom of speech. You can talk new democracies looks like what kind of country, for example, if it's easier for the debaters to understand. And then can also talk about freedom of speech, how it looks like, not necessarily just freedom of speech means that people free to talk. So it in the way that you can mechanize it. For opening government, models or ways of executing a policy will help, though it's not as always mandatory, which means that for OO, there will be several scenarios. First, to stick with the status quo for like no urgency to change. So just say that, oh, we will just stay with the status quo because it's good enough already, or we will have the status quo, but we'll modify it a bit in a way that will suit more to the citizens or the society, depending on the motion. And there will be also counter proposal, means that this has to be mutually exclusive. So no arguments about doing what OG proposed and what you propose. Yeah, that's just greedy and unrealistic. So cannot just say that we will do both of them because it's a bit hard. So having counter proposal, meaning that a very different one. Next, theme closing. So as closing, the most important thing is to have an extension. So it means it's something entirely new to the debate that can manifest in many forms. New lines of logic, new conclusion, new example, new after analysis, new responses, etc. So it's important to not just pre-mention what has been discussed in the opening, but also have an extension that will support your team identity. Next thing is to summarize the debate in favor of your team. So it's a bit of bias adjudication. That's why maybe a lot of debaters here already have seen lots of debate video where they started saying that, oh, the opening team wasn't successful, whatever it is. It's a form of like, they only talk about this. That's how some of the examples to summarize, but you can also definitely modify it the way you want. And lastly, you may fill in the gaps of your opening, but refrain from repeating. Again, no repetition. So emphasize why filling in the gap gap benefits you as a closing team instead. So for example, opening already talk about this, but that's not enough. We have to talk about the vulnerable actor, or we can talk about how it will impact people who never get that chance, blah, blah, blah. So like it's an entirely new thing that you contributed, and you can mention that in both of your speakers. Next up, then the speaker roles for the first opening, who are the Prime Minister and Leader of Opposition. So there is stance and there is arguments. For first opening, arguments is not enough because at first, definitely there should be a discussion about the background of the motion, the root problems, the model, especially in Prime Minister. But then Leader of Opposition, like previously, we have stated that you can choose to stick with the status quo or having a modified or improved status quo or creating an entirely new proposal. So it shouldn't be mutually exclusive. So very new proposal that can cater the needs of like your arguments. Now on to arguments. Arguments should start with what you believe to be the most valuable or important in the debate according to the motion. And Leader of Opposition should respond to the Prime Minister on top of developing new arguments. So it means that start with the most important thing, and then for the Leader of Opposition, start with responding the case of Prime Minister before going through the arguments that you have prepared. Next, on the second opening, the Deputy Prime Minister and Deputy Leader of Opposition. Again, responses, or you may call it rebuttals, or you may call it engagement in the beginning. Usually it's in the beginning, or you can integrate it depending on the way you want it. So you provide key responses to the opposing team because you don't want the closing team to just take all the time to respond to opening side, and you are seen as less contributive, right? And also strengthen your team. This is the way that you can do it, by providing additional arguments or opposing that motion, for example, in opposition. And you can basically add more to what your previous speaker has discussed or hasn't discussed. So creating a new argument as well. Additional point layers would be very beneficial for your team to win in the opening team. Next, for the closing. So very unique for the closing, the members, we call it member of government and member of the opposition. Again, there should be extension. The extension can start by highlighting and explaining the very unique and specific contribution from your team. This is something that opening shouldn't have discussed, or even if they have discussed it, you have to repack in a way that fill the gap of what opening didn't do. And framing is also very important in closing team because you need to highlight why it matters more than opening. But at the same time, don't forget to give responses to the opposing teams because definitely they still have lots of argument they have discussed, and you have to say that it might be true or it might not be true, and in what way it will be better under your case. For the second closing, or usually we call it government whip and opposition whip. So first, summarize and strengthen the team's case. not just a summary of everything, but also count it as a response. So as sweep, there has been 6 or 7 speakers. Therefore, you have to give like a bias adjudication discussing what has your team done in the debate and why it's better in comparison to other teams. So you can add explanation, characterization, example, or any other responses that can still manifest in the same conclusion based on what both speakers in your team have discussed or like said that it will be the goal of your team contribution. Lastly, also responses. Again, a debate is about engaging with other debater. You have to argue and provide some final responses to the previous speaker. And you may also structure it in a way that summarizes everything. So the whips definitely have more room to give any other, to give the responses in any way possible that will strengthen. But again, the goal is to strengthen the team case and to show that your team contributed more than the other team. All right, last one here is about POI. I have mentioned a lot that POI is very important because POI is a form for the other speaker who is not speaking to give interjection to the speaker who is talking. So some important note, POI may last up to 15 seconds or less than that. So a speaker may cut it before 15 seconds, or if the one that over the POI does not stop speaking after 15 seconds, usually the chair will say order, so you have to stop. You have to stop and just like let the speaker answer that first. And if in some cases, some debaters say that 15 seconds, oh, stop, I know it already, then the panel might assess whether it's legitimate or not. So I think the best way for all the debaters to do POI is just to go with the time frame of 15 seconds for the one giving the POI and for the one that will take the POI. And remember that there shouldn't be any POI over after the 6-minute mark, because we have 7 minutes. You can stop only like at 6 and that's it. But for example, at the one that give POI said POI in minute 5:45, for example, but then the speaker only give the chance in minute 6, it's still okay because there's still like 15 seconds for the one asking for POI to deliver their POI. Okay, but remember that just because you're given the chance to do POI, don't persistently like ask POI again and again. If the speaker said to stop, like I don't want it, no thank you, just give them some breaks and then give another POI again in like after they have delivered something. So please be also careful and don't be rude. Next up, we'll have about the key to winning debates. I'll give the floor to Kak Omar.
All right, thank you, Feli, for the introduction regarding BP speeches and also the basics, such as time, POIs, and everything else. So moving forward, I will specifically talk about what are the things that teams should and could do in order to win debates. And I'm going to talk about motion types as well. So it's very important to note that whatever we have here, whatever we are writing, whatever we are presenting to you right now, is not just something that we came up before this seminar. It's something that has been constantly evaluated throughout the years, internationally as well. So these are the standards that are used by the World's University Debating Championship. So that's why use this materials that we are providing to you, and you should do great in NUDC. So that's why this part is very important, because how teams are being evaluated in a debate is by evaluating their persuasiveness. And that persuasiveness is defined with respect to the burdens their side of the debate is attempting to prove. So for example, opening government has a different burden with opening opposition, and potentially closing teams will have different burdens with their opening teams as well. But obviously, in order to be persuasive, there are rules that you need to follow. So there are 2 important comments that I would like to make. First, everyone can be persuasive about everything, right? But this will not help for you to win a debate if it is not relevant with the burdens that teams are seeking to prove. The rules of debating constrain legitimate ways to be persuasive. For example, you can be persuasive if you want to have a POI for 1 minute, but the rule says you can only do POI for 15 seconds. So that's why you cannot be persuasive if you speak more than 15 seconds during a POI, for example. Or same thing, whip speeches are not allowed to bring new materials, but if they can bring new materials, they can be very persuasive, right? But if, let's say, a whip speaker does provide a new material, then we cannot count their material as persuasive because it goes against the rule. So in BP debating, if there are violation of rules, we are not going to punish teams or punish speakers by giving them low score, automatic losses. There's no such thing. But what we can do is to just ignore everything that was said in violation of the rules. So we're just going to discount related to that. So that's the best way for you to be persuasive. And we can go to the next slide. Feli did talk a little bit about motion-based burden. So we're going to address motions here because motions, or I guess the simplest way, let me share screen. All right. So I believe everyone can see my screen now. Sorry for that. Cool. So for this one, motion is basically, I would say the easiest way to describe it is the topic of the debate, right? So the motions are set by a team of judges at a tournament known as the Adjudication Core, also known as the CA team, CAP, AdJcore for short. And these are myself, Feli, Deta, Batara, and also Hans that have been introduced earlier. So teams should debate the motion in the spirit of the motion and the tournament. So on some occasions, when we are providing the debate topic 15 minutes before the debate starts, there might be some additional information to help teams understand more what the debate should be. And we are calling this as info slide. This usually consists of a short explanatory paragraph, which can serve several purposes, from simple clarification of words in the motion to giving context and relevant information about potential issues in this debate. So for the purposes of the debate, any information provided in the info slide should be assumed to be true, yeah? So teams are free to provide additional definition. They do not have to always and only define things based on the info slide because, again, info slide will not always be given. It will only be given to specific terms or specific situations that we believe teams or participants should know. But it's not the only that's not the only information that you can use in the debate. But if it is being provided, it has to be assumed to be true, and therefore feel free to add anything other than that. All right. So there are 3 motion types that you need to be familiar with in order for you to come up with the most appropriate strategy, irrespective of your team in BP debating, yeah? So the first one is analysis, second is a policy debate, and third one is actor debate. We're going to address them one by one, and we're going to open questions at the end. So please pay attention because this is very important, and this is basically the most important part of like preparing your case during the preparation time of 15 minutes that Feli has mentioned earlier, in order for you to come up with the best possible case that a team could bring. So the first one is an analysis motion. Usually you would find this like words. You can find THBT, THO, THS. What do they mean, right? Basically, they're short for this house believes that, this house opposes, this house supports, and the meaning is literally quite simple. This house believes that means Dewan ini percaya, this house opposes, Dewan ini oppose, dan seterusnya. So in this specific context, when we are talking about Dewan ini, you're not necessarily the parliament, because in analysis motion, you are most likely, or more often than not, you are assuming the role of a neutral observer, right? Someone who is neutral, and you're just making an assessment regarding something in which it requires you to assess whether the value of a certain element, item, object, etc. is more positive or negative from your perspective as a neutral person. So that's why, because it's just technically an opinion about how something, whether something is positive or negative from that neutral person's perspective, usually doesn't have to fulfill certain logistical feasibility requirements. So take a look at the example. This is not anyone's opinion. This is just an example. So this house believes that private universities bring more harm than good. Then in that case, you are not the government of a certain country. You're not the parliament of a certain country. You are a neutral observer, can be anyone, can be the society, but I guess in that case, irrespective of who is the actor, you are a neutral observer. So anyone who doesn't have immediate interest in the issue, and you are currently thinking or assessing whether or not it's true, right? So if the statement is this house believes that private universities bring more harm than good, if you are the government teams, then you have to prove why there are more harms than good of private universities out of various metrics, right? And if you're team opposition, then you just need to prove that the statement is not true, aka proving why private universities bring more good than harm. That's quite simple. The second example is this house supports the abolishment of private universities. Again, this is just an example, no one's actual opinion. So in that case, government teams need to explain why then having private universities abolished, or therefore will no longer be around in this world that they support, why is it a good thing, right? And then team oppositions, in that case, closing and even opening opposition as well, will just need to defend a world. Why then supporting that abolishment is not a good idea, because the world will probably be more chaotic or everything else, or monopoly of public education, and therefore it's a bad thing. So a lot of things that you could explore as teams, but you just need to understand what the motion expects. So that's why in this type of motion, in that case analysis motion, you just need to evaluate again whether or not the statement is true based on your position. The second type of motion that is quite common as well is a policy debate. So policy debate usually starts with this house would, which means literally Dewan ini akan melakukan sesuatu. And therefore, in specific policy debate, unless specified otherwise, this house or Dewan ini is literally the parliament of the country or parliament of the state. So in this specific debate, what you need to focus on as speakers or as teams, depending on your position, is to assess whether or not the policy should be implemented. So usually it's not necessarily about that policy brings more harm than good or otherwise, but why the value achieves a specific threshold to compel the actor to do something, right? When government introduces a new policy, there must be some problems, there must be some restrictions that they need to meet in order for them to introduce that policy. And the same thing as team opposition, they will need to say, no, we don't need to do that problem, or things like that. I think Feli has covered this a little bit in the team roles regarding what opposition could do, whether you want to stick with the status quo, whether you want to modify the status quo, or whether or not you want to come up with a counter proposal, right? So for example, this house would ban, again, still an example, this house would ban private universities. In that case, who has the power to actually ban institutions, right? Must be the government. So it cannot be a neutral observer. So the perspective of the debate has to be from that actor who has the power to do it. In that case, the government, right, or the state, the parliament, they can decide whether or not they want to ban this. So in government teams, what they need to do is to explain why we have to ban this, what are the problems, or why then those problems meet the threshold to compel the state to actually ban them, right? And why then it should be implemented because it will achieve some good, for example. And in that case, opposition can do all of the strategies that we have discussed. They can just ignore the problem. No, it's not urgent. The problem is exaggerated by the government. So therefore, we must not ban private universities. Or they want to say that, instead of banning private universities, what we propose is to provide regulations or stricter regulations, for example, and things like that. So that is the example of policy debate. Moving on. So we are going to specifically talk about counter-proposal and alternative. I know there's a lot of words here. I'm not going to explain everything as written, because eventually we're going to share the slides to you after the seminar ended. And in that case, I just want you to imagine there are differences between counter-proposal and alternatives, especially if you're the opposition, because counter-proposal and alternatives, I guess, are the things that team opposition could use as a strategy if they are opposing team governments in this House wood motions or in policy motions. So counterproposal is that in policy debate, what matters is that the opposition, as long as they can just provide reasons why then the policy should not be done or why it's a bad idea, it's fine. But sometimes you want to go a little bit further and provide a counter proposal, I guess, something that is not introduced by team government, something that is mutually exclusive, meaning that they cannot coexist. They have to be things that are oppositional to a certain extent, if not to a very large extent. They can do so. So that means that if team opposition want to use this strategy, they have to come up with something that is equally the same, basically something that is equal to the burden that we expect from team opening government. So if team opening government wants to introduce a policy and we expect them to explain how the policy will take place, what are the logistics, what are the feasibilities and everything else, then team opposition, if they want to use counterproposal, they have to do this as well. So again, because this is worded as counterproposal, it needs to come up from the leader of opposition, because if, let's say, team opposition introduce a counter proposal, right? The weighing or the way the debate is being assessed change. Because if, let's say, team opposition does not bring counter proposal, then it's just about whether or not implementation of the policy is good or bad, right? But if, let's say, team opening opposition decided to introduce a counter proposal, then the comparison in the debate would be about the policy that government teams are proposing, whether or not their implementation would be good or bad. And then in team opposition, same thing with team opposition. So it will be about those two counter proposals. So that's why you have to be very careful if you want to introduce counter proposal. You don't have to do it. If you can do it and you can do it well, then it will be very rewarding. Because BP is always about a game of strategy. It's about what do you want to do? What are the burdens that you want to take? Because you have the choice to do it, right? So yeah, think of this as a high risk, high reward thing for you. So that would be for counter proposals. For alternatives, so again, you can suggest a range of viable alternative arguments and solutions are not the same as advancing counter proposition. Because in that case, opening opposition has the right to point a variety of possible superior alternatives without committing to a counter proposition. So the reason why this is not the same, like why counter policy and alternatives are not the same, is because providing a range of possibilities or alternatives is not the same as providing a specific mechanism that the whole opposition team must commit to. Counterproposal looks like a commitment, looks like a program that you want to do to combat whatever team government is proposing. Alternatives are just basically saying things like, we don't need that. We already have this, and that in status quo, or there are possibilities of doing things in status quo that are not in the form of that policy that team government mentioned. So that's why it's basically just to say that there are other ways. And again, therefore, it could also be used to prove that why then the policy is probably not going to be good or it's not necessary. So that's why these are two possible options that team opposition could do in policy debates. I'm going to move on to another analysis type motion. We call this as the retroactive variations. The reason that why we put it in third, because it's slightly more complicated than the typical analysis motion and also the typical policy motion. So there are two types of retroactive motions. The first one is a regrets motion. It says, it usually starts with THR or THR, I guess. So, which is very astute considering the time. Anyway, so when we're talking about this house of regrets, the debate should be about assessing whether the world would be a better place with or without the thesis stated in the motion. In that case, just think of it that you have a benefit of a hindsight. What is the benefit of a hindsight? It means that you can evaluate the past and how the past could have been because you have lived that time, for example. We are going to talk about the example motion down there. So in that case, it's not just about you are. So if we can translate this, right, it's not just kami menyayangkan, because if you're just menyayangkan something, it's just you are hoping for something that could have been done in place of that thing you are regretting, right? So that's why with that framework, the government teams in this House regrets motion is expected to provide an antithesis or a counterfactual of that world. If let's say you're regretting something, right? You're regretting that, for example, you're in school and you regret that you cut class. In that case, if you regret something, you just don't regret it, but you also need to evaluate what you would have done if you didn't cut class, for example. Not that we're promoting cutting class, of course. So I think that's just an example, right? So that's why antithesis is exactly that. What are the things that you could have done if you didn't do the things you regret? So that's why it's very important to understand that these antithesis or this counterfactual is something that you cannot fiat, which we are going to address later, as they need to explain the likelihood of such things, right? For example, this House regrets the prevalence of private universities in Indonesian educational system. Notice that it's not the same with proving or talking about why private universities bring more harm than good. It's not the same with banning, because in that case, you are in this case, in this example, you are evaluating whether or not the prevalence of private universities in Indonesian educational system should be regretted or not. And therefore, if you want to regret it, then you need to explain what could happen otherwise if, let's say, this thing doesn't exist. So basically, the main framework in this House regrets motion is to assume that you regret this and you hope something else would happen, and why then what you hope is better than what we have today, which is why then we regret them. So in opposition then, what you can do in this House regrets motion is to just say that no, we shouldn't regret it because of various reasons, right? Because, for example, your antithesis or your counterfactual is not necessarily a better alternative. So that's why that we need to do this, right? That's why we do not need to regret this or things like that. All right. So, but I guess the most important part, again, if let's say we regret this prevalence, what would happen otherwise, right? So team government needs to explain. For example, they could say about the counterfactual or the antithesis to the prevalence of private universities, assuming they will not exist in this world that we envision, then it will be a monopoly of public university, for example. And why then it's a good thing? And then opposition will just have to respond why then it's not a good thing. So I hope you get the gist of this House regrets motion. Next one is this House prefers motions, which is another variation of a retroactive debate, because retroactive means that you can evaluate today based on the information that you have in the past or what already happened in the past, and therefore you wish that there would be some sort of a different reality, right? So for example, this House regrets is basically talking about a different history in case that something doesn't exist and then something else was created, how then history would change or how the world would change at that point when we regret something, right? And another thing exists. But in prefers motion, you are technically talking about a different reality, something that pop culture has discussed quite a lot, talking about multiverse and everything else. So that's why this House prefers motion should be about the extent of which the statement is true, considering the elements being discussed or stated in the motion. So in that case, if the wording says that this House prefers, let's say, apple to orange, right? For example, this is a very arbitrary example that I could just think of at the moment. So in that case, you just need to explain that why then that the first thing that you mentioned that you prefer should be, assessed in terms of quality, why then it should be preferred over the other. But what you need to understand in this House prefers motion is that there are a lot of variations to it as well. So if let's say this House prefers studying at night, for example, then as the government, you just need to explain that why then studying at night is more preferable or why is it a good thing, right? For team opposition, they just need to explain that why then it's something that is not preferable. So the comparative to that is probably studying at any other time than night. So think of it as a framework in this House prefers motion. So if the wording is this House prefers X or A, then team opposition will just need to explain why then A or X is not preferable compared to status quo. At times, you will also encounter this House prefers motion in which it's clearly stated this House prefers X to B, which means that team government wants X to be the, let's say, to be what they prefer, and then they do not prefer a B or Y, for example. So in that case, team opposition will have to defend the other way around that is stated in the motion. So basically, the shortcut to this, if the alternative or if the comparative is not mentioned, then it has to always be about status quo. You cannot imagine a new world that is suddenly not status quo or something that is not mentioned in the comparative. So I hope that's clear. Again, in the example, this house prefers a world in which the educational system is entirely run by the state. So the opposition, in that case, their strategy is not to say, okay, we want to create a world in which the educational system is entirely run by private entities, for example. Opposition cannot run that, because the rule of the this house prefers motion states that if it's not mentioned in terms of what's the comparative or what is the alternate world that we are debating, it has to be status quo. And status quo is basically a world where the educational system has some players from the private sector and also the public sector, right? So that is what team opposition needs to defend. Unless, of course, the motion or the wording changes. This house prefers a world in which the educational system is entirely run by the state, then rather than entirely run by private sectors, for example. Then opposition will have to defend what the world would be if, let's say, it's entirely run by the state by private entities, for example. So you just need to be very, very careful in terms of reading all of this wordings in the motion and understand the expectations that you need to fulfill in order for you to be persuasive. The last type of motion is an actor motion. This one is very quick. So usually it starts with as blank, 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 this house would, this house believe that, etc. So the motion could be a retroactive motion, could be I don't know, a policy debate, could be an analysis debate. But the difference is you will be specified in terms of who you are debating as, because of the first few words, as something, as someone, as blah, blah, blah. You want to do that, or you believe that they should do that, etc. So the debate is not whether or not the motion is true from the perspective, so the debate is about whether or not the statement is true from the perspective of the stated actor, not from a neutral perspective. So teams must consider the actor's knowledge, values, and interests in regards with the motion in order to be very persuasive. So again, for example, as public universities, this house would actively call for the abolishment of private universities. In that case, you are not debating as the parliament, you're not debating as, let's say, general society or as a student, but you are debating specifically from people in power in public universities, and why then doing this fulfills your interests, right? So this is the difference in terms of motion types. And I have to let you know, this is the last motion type that I want you to be familiar with, basically. And we are going to release motions later on, both in the regionals and also in the national stage, based on what we have shared so far. The reason that, again, why this is very important, not only that we are going to release motions based on this, but you just need to also understand that these are really, understanding this is really the key to winning, because judges will eventually need to see the debate from what we have just mentioned. Again, you can be as persuasive as you want, but if it's irrelevant, it's not within the rules, and rules are like each motion type also has a rule, then you're not going to be persuasive. So that's why even judges need to be familiar with this. So that's why then this is very, very important. So moving on about definitions, teams are expected to debate at a level of generality implied in the motion. So let's say, for example, if there's no specificity mentioned in the motion, then do assume that the debate takes place in any functional democracy. So for example, again, in the motion of this house would ban private universities, some teams might be inclined to talk only about, okay, we're going to limit this debate in Indonesia. So technically you can do that, but it's not specified if you want to do it in Indonesia, right? It could be in any functional democracy. So that's why then do not limit the debate if it's not specified. So what you can do is to exclude fringe or anomalous examples, and you can definitely define a detailed mechanism to implement the motion. What is illegitimate, or something the team should not do, is to only include fringe or anomalous examples to support your case, taking the worst case scenario, taking the worst examples out there to prove your case, which is basically an anomaly, right? And therefore does not represent the whole situation regarding the topic. Or it's also illegitimate for you to restrict the debate to a very specific setting without strong justification. For example, this House would ban private universities. It's illegitimate for the government team, especially opening government team, to say this debate is going to take place in the 90s, where some reforms are taking place or things like that. Well, technically, you cannot do that, because it is not implied in the motion. So you must not restrict the debate to a very specific setting unless stated otherwise. Another thing that is illegitimate to do is to propose a mechanism that is not in line with the spirit of the motion, squarely. For example, in minimum quota, if you encounter that this House would put minimum quota for women in the parliament, for example, minimum quota means that there is a certain number that you want to be met, right? If, let's say, there are 200 parliament members, you want to set a minimum quota of 40, meaning that at least or minimum you want 40 women in the parliament, for example. But minimum quota, we have seen people defining it as minimum quota means that it should be as low as possible or as minimum as possible. That is not the correct definition of a minimum quota. So that's why this is just an example. Be careful about definitions, and that's why we're telling you this. So this next thing that we would like to explain is a government fiat, or it doesn't have to be government. It's just fiat in general. And it's not the car, if you're familiar with the brand, but regardless, fiat means that government teams may assume that the motion will pass in the parliament. In that case, like the example to this is that for in any debate regarding policy motion, so fiat typically applies in policy motion. Again, this house would ban private universities. If that is the example, then government and opposition must assume that the parliament already agrees that it can be done, right? But the question is whether or not it should be done. So you're already like talking in the parliament. You're no longer talking about whether or not you will agree that this thing should be discussed, right? Because then therefore it violates the fiat rule. But what is being discussed is whether or not the implementation will be good. So that's why if, let's say, team government wants to introduce a policy and then team opposition says, no, we don't think it's a good idea because eventually we believe that this will not pass the parliament. It's impossible to get everyone agree for this policy to pass in the parliament. Then if that's the case, we're not going to have a debate. We're just going to talk about the technicalities of the politics of that parliament, for example, which means that it goes against the spirit of the motion. So what you need to assume in policy debate is that it will pass. It's just a matter of should it pass, right? Because of the assessments that you have provided regarding the topic. So that's why in the context of government fiat, opposition, if they want to bring counter proposal, then government also must assume that the fiat applies to that opposition, because we cannot have double standards, right? We do not want opposition to question our fiat, the same thing that we shouldn't question team opposition, regarding their fiat. So again, the most important part is this. It is important to note that what should be debated in policy motion is not whether the motion will pass in the parliament for whatever reasons, because, we're not going to have the money, we're not going to have the logistical capabilities, I don't think that the parties will agree, the coalition will agree. No, that's not what you need to debate. But the debate is about whether having the motion in effect is good or bad. I hope that's clear. So this is pretty technical, and I'm pretty sure TAP team will address this as well. But I think that we can go over this quickly. Basically, at the end of the debate, the judge will explain to you the reasons that why the rankings are as follows, because in BP debating, you're going to be ranked, right? 1, 2, 3, and 4, depending on the contributions, depending on the persuasiveness. So I guess in that case, the judge will have to explain the reasons to you. And because of that, the judges will be scored by you. In that case, you're going to give feedback. You're going to share your thoughts about the debate, about the judge way of explaining things. So I guess in that case, this one is pretty quick, but eventually you will encounter this later on. So I think we can just move forward from this one. So the last part of this debate briefing is to talk about knifing. That's why I put this in appendix, because knifing is basically a term to describe a situation in which the closing teams operate in a contradictory model and or principle with their opening teams. So in that case, basically, closing teams bring an argument or bring a case that goes against their opening. So knifing does not necessarily give the team an automatic loss, but it does reduce their persuasiveness in this debate because they have to be consistent. That's part of the rule, right? So they're allowed to have something different as long as they are not contradictory. Knifing can also happen between speakers. For example, Deputy Prime Minister contradicting their Prime Minister. Should this be this case? So this is more for judge. But do not punish the team as a whole. Just mark the contradicting speakers as less persuasive. But speakers, please be aware that remember that whatever you're saying in the debate is being evaluated by the judges, which means that be careful of coming up with a contradictory statement, whether it's to your opening team or to your previous speaker, if you are the second speaker in the team. So that's why that you have to be very careful. Again, these are the things that we mentioned. You can be as persuasive as you want, but there are rules that you need to follow in BP debating. And if you violate the rules, we're just going to ignore the benefits of you ignoring those rules. All right, so basically that's the end of the debate briefing. I believe that we're going to have judge briefing after Ishoma. So if I am allowed to entertain questions, we're more than happy to open one. How is the best way for us to do this, Mbak Farah? Apakah kita langsung tunjuk aja atau? Or I guess the easiest way, kalau misalnya memang mau bertanya, bisa taruh di chat. Nanti saya akan coba bahas. How many time do we have left? Let's see, karena lagi share screen, nggak bisa buka screen yang lain. Lihat HP dulu. Okay, are there any questions? Okay, the questions should be related to the briefings. Anything related to the logistics, this is not the right time. So to Rosamund Justan, apologies, we cannot answer that question now. We are going to address that later on, but the questions that we are opening right now is specifically for the debate briefing. So someone asked, what about special knowledge in debates, such as bringing specific data? How do we assess it as a judge? We're going to cover this in the judge briefing. But I guess we can quickly talk about this for teams. If you want to bring specific data, data does not mean that just because you have more data means that you can win, because specific information is not necessarily persuasive. Because if you're just going to say, we should do this because 80% agree, it doesn't necessarily prove that whether or not it's a good idea. We should do this because scientists have proven that it's good for this. Which also, when we're talking about research, for example, they're just using samples. They do not generally cover certain populations or groups of people. So therefore, bringing specific data does not necessarily mean that you can automatically win, because they are used to support your logical prowess, okay? Not necessarily to prove why then it's the case the entire time. So when we, I hope that answers. Next question, when we propose a counter proposal as a closing, how do we know we are not being contradictive? I guess the simplest way to assess whether or not you're going to be contradictive is just to ask yourself, if I'm going to say this, if we're going to introduce this, then does it go against what team opposition already mentioned? But here's the thing. If you are a closing team, it's unlikely for you to have to bring a counter proposal, because again, as mentioned in the brief earlier, that counter proposal has to come up as soon as the leader of opposition. So let's say you are the closing team, and unfortunately, your leader of opposition in that debate does not bring a counter proposal, then we do not suggest you to do that, because that alters the comparative in this debate, which means that if you bring a counter proposal late and everyone already has their own metric or their own comparison of the debate, and then you come up with something different, it could go against you. It could also go like for your advantage, but we don't know, right? So just be strategic about it. But again, the question is, I guess if you want to know whether or not you're going to be contradictive, just ask yourself, if I say this, will I contradict, will I basically, violate or negate what my opening has said? So yeah, that's why you need to also still listen to your opening teams. Are we going to have a simulation later on? Technically, we already record a simulation session in which you're going to watch a debate, we're going to see the debate, and after that, we're going to evaluate the debate later on. So yes. Can we bring counter proposal in closing opposition? I believe I just answered that. Highly discouraged. Will this presentation be shared? I did mention, yes, it's going to be shared, but we just want you to listen to it first before we immediately share it, because we noticed that if people ask for PPTs first before the actual presentation, they think that they can sneak and then read things, but we know they do not necessarily read it, and eventually that they do not pay attention. That's why we're doing this. But yes, it will be shared. Does writing notes on GDocs be allowed? Considering most of us are already accustomed to the digital case, well, technically, you're not allowed to do so because a lot of risks are associated with it, right? You're going to, let's say, be exposed to possibilities of using, let's say, I don't know, Google to browse, for example. So we cannot afford that risk. And if the reasoning is we are already accustomed to digital case building during COVID, well, I suggest you to also be accustomed to case building by paper again. Use recycled papers. I believe that you're not going to harm the environment that much if you still have a lot of papers that have been used before. Can you please go back to the slide about BP format and order of speech? Yes. I believe it should be one of the earlier part of the presentation. There you go. So it's for past novel. Take a screenshot if you need. Okay, I'm going to address the next question. How do we do POI for online debate? How if more than one people POI at once? Again, POI, if you want to throw POI, it's up to the speaker who is currently speaking to decide whether or not they want to take your POI, right? Which means if more than one people POI at once, it doesn't matter because the person who is speaking will only choose one. So technically, it's not going to be an issue. But in the online debate situation, a lot of options. You can use the chat system. Hello, I want to POI. You can turn on the camera. You can wave to them. You can use the raise hand feature on Zoom. But what matters is that the speaker who is speaking, we will ask them as judges, what's your preference for POI? So if they say, my POI preference is through chat, so if you want to offer them a POI, then use the chat feature. Do not verbally unmute, right? Do not say it, hey, I want a POI, or things like that. But if they specifically say, I will not read the chat, so if you want to offer a POI, just unmute yourself, then do it, okay? But again, remember there are rules. You must not heckle, you must not badger. There are certain seconds that you need to wait after your first POI is rejected. And yeah. Could you share again slide of scoring for judging? I did say the reason that why we cover this so fast is because TAP team will address this later on. Is just to give you a heads up that eventually you will be scoring the judge. We're going to share the scoring range later on, so it's okay. Don't need to worry about this. How do we respond to a team who brings a touristic definition context on the floor? So that's a very good question. I guess in that case, you do not necessarily have to respond to them. What you need to do is to explain that why then it is truistic and why then it's unfair to debate using that metric. And after that, you talk after you provide a definition that you think is fair, and the judges will be able to evaluate that. Please reemphasize the prohibition of any access and assistance during case building so everybody totally understand and taking care about the rules. Yes, thank you for the reminder. And yeah, I guess I'm going to re-emphasize this, that you must not be assisted by anyone during prep. It's just you and your teammate. Trust yourself. You're better definitely than you think, especially if you feel the urge to cheat, if you feel the urge to be helped by other people. No, you are I believe in all of you, right? So just do it among yourself. You cannot access Google. Eventually, we will find out. A lot of people think that, a lot of people cheat because they think they're not going to get caught. But we do have some sort of ways or technologies to find out if people cheat. So this is very important. Be aware. We're not going to tolerate cheating. We're not going to tolerate it in any shape or form, whether it's minor or not. So yeah. Next question from Mashkurin Fajarina. As a judge, do we have a form of it consisting the indicator for debaters? I'm not exactly sure what it means. So if you could clarify later on, that would be great. Next, Pagika, apabila terdapat motion susah dipahami apa yang harus dilakukan di case building. If you are not sure what the motion means, ask the adjudication core. In that case, you're most likely gonna see me, so you can always ask me before the debate starts. Next from Aisha, in that case, in the case that in a closing team, the team of Gov or Op has an elaborated case, can whip elaborate it? So technically you can, but if again, what a whip speech can do is to, let's say, respond and to frame their case, right? So if elaboration is framed as just a way to frame the case better, then that could work, but I would not suggest so, because I assume in that case there is not a good teamwork there if the whip has to do most of the work. But I guess what you need to do is to really split the work between the two, so whip can just focus on responding and framing and being, you know, comparative with the other teams in this debate. Do we really not allowed to look at our paper when we do our speech? No, you are allowed. I'm not sure who said that you're not allowed to do this, because you are allowed to read from paper. What is not allowed is a printed material in your speech. For example, you have a paper, you have a research, you have a journal that you have done, that it's a news that you have read. You can bring those printed things on prep, right? During prep, you can bring all of those printed materials. But when you're delivering your speech, you cannot bring those printed materials. It must only be the papers that you're using to take notes. So from this anonymous person, I guess, you are indeed allowed to look at your paper when you do your speech, just not a printed material that you have read or that you have gathered in the past. Okay, next is from Ramazan 214 something. Can we bring specific laws, UU, peraturan pemerintah, especially during debate related to laws such as criminal justice system and politics? Yes, technically you can, but you just need to explain the relevance. Why then you're bringing that up? It's not to say that, oh, we shouldn't do this because it goes against the law. Well, I guess we introduce new laws all the time. So it's just a matter about it's against the law or not, but why then we need to uphold that law, and therefore that policy should not be introduced. So just mention that you need to make your case more relevant with the motion. When the motion there is no word as, can we define this house to be certain actor? This house would ban athlete who has crime record to be back in sport. In this motion, we don't play as government, but as an official team or club. How is it? Well, I guess it depends on the context. I think that technically it could be about the team or the club. So that's a very good question from Muhammad from UMSU. So that's fair, and that could be the case. You just need to, again, I guess the easiest way to say in this House vote motion, who are the ones doing this policy? Is it the government or is it the club, for example, in this specific question? Just imagine who would have the power to decide that. So if, let's say, the motion is this House would ban athlete with criminal records to be back in sport, then most likely it's either the club or the association, right? Like FIFA or PSSE, etc. So again, it depends on the context. But yes, correct. It doesn't always have to be the government. So you can define the actor to a certain party that has the power over that. But I imagine it will not be like the vast majority of instances. So yeah. Next is from Nurmazia Hurin. Will one of the debate motion topics emerge? How many rounds will each team appear during the debate? Whether it's permissible to bring notes, or I addressed the last question already. Notes, yes. But mobile phone gadgets, technically you cannot use them to browse. Will one of the debate motion topics emerge? I'm not sure of this question, but like mentioned, the debate motion will be shared 15 minutes before the debate. So please wait for debate tournament to actually take place. How many rounds will each team appear? I think that we have covered this in Pedoman, so we suggest you to highly read it, not highly read it, I mean to really read it, because we mentioned that in regionals, teams are going to compete in 6 preliminary rounds. And then for the elimination rounds, it's going to depend on the total number of teams in the tournament. But in the national stage, we're going to have 7 in rounds first, and after that, 2 modified out rounds, and then we're going to start the debate from quarters. So yeah, we have that in the Pedoman, so please give them a read. question is from Lutfi Karim talking about, so we will be judged on how persuasive we deliver it. Again, persuasive is not about, I think we covered this. So let me go back to that. The definition of persuasive is how persuasive is your content, not how persuasive is your speech in terms of eloquence. Just because you have amazing accent or like super white people accent, in that case, American or British or whatever, if let's say the content is not good, then it's not persuasive. So again, the persuasiveness technically refers to this. If you are persuasive, if you're able to fulfill the logical burden, if you're able to fulfill the motion-based burden, and if you really compare and frame your team compared to the other 3 teams. Okay. So next from James Barron, hi Omar, about the fiat policy in motion, what should the counter teams do if there's a team that brings a solution or models that realistically would not be tangible? Then in that case, you can call that out. You can say that it's not tangible because of what, right? Because in the motion, usually the policy is stated generally in terms of what are we going to do. So again, team government can just say that, hey, we want to do this through all of these models or mechanisms. And if you think that is unrealistic, then call that out. What you're calling out is the mechanism. But at the same time, you also need to explain, or even in the best case, that everything else is realistic, it's tangible, it can be done. Why then implementing it's still a bad idea? That would be the perfect strategy to address that. I hope that answers. Next question, just to make sure there is no prepared motion. Yep, there will be no prepared motion in BP. There has never been no prepared motion in BP, be it in NUDC or any other BP tournaments. So yeah. Next is from Hidayat Nur from Unpam. If the debater were talking under 7 minutes, are there any impacts for our team score, or is it just going to affect the personal scoring? You're not going to have any penalties if you speak less than 7 minutes. It doesn't matter. Someone could speak for 2 minutes, but have more contents than someone who speaks for 6 minutes. So what matters is the content. And yeah, but technically it will affect your personal scoring, obviously, depending on what you are sharing in your speeches. If let's say it will eventually affect the whole situation or the whole ranking, yes, it will affect the team score eventually, because team score is technically a total score of personal scores, right? So if something affects personal scores, it will definitely affect team scores. So we cannot see you share the screen. Is it the case? Because I believe that some people, like the person right after that, say you have screenshotted. So technically, I believe it should be visible. All right, I'll just move on for now. Next question. Hi, Ka. Maybe this is a classic issue among debaters in general, but let's say, for instance, we're given the government role or a side that stands with the motion, but we are absolutely biased or against towards the given motion. How do we comprehend and manage those situations? This is a very good question, but this is also the purpose of debating. It's for you to understand different sides of different things, different perspectives regarding different topics. That's why we are doing this, and that's why we need to proliferate this, right? We want everyone to be habituated that there's no, let's say, absolute truth when we're talking about certain issues. There are always different opinions, and there are always different reasons that why people have different opinions. So if you're worried whether or not you can speak on a motion that you do not necessarily agree with, then you're not debating as you. You're debating as either a neutral observer, as a government, or as anyone else. So you have to understand different people's shoes. You also need to assume that things happen outside of our own bubble. So that's why we need to just understand that it's uncomfortable for sure, of course, and it happened a lot, and it could be affecting the way you deliver your speech or your contents. But again, the world is multidimensional, basically, right? What we believe is true is not always true for not just one other person, but potentially like thousands or millions of other people. So that's why just put your shoes in the other person as well. For example, something that you agree with, another person would not necessarily agree with, but in debate, you have to, let's say, assume different roles as if you technically agree with that depending on your position. So yeah, that's my best advice. But secondly, do not worry. We are going to make sure that the motions we're going to provide are not going to make people severely uncomfortable as well. So yeah, I hope that kind of gives you the ease. Okay, someone asked, not sure who is this addressed, but morning, sis. It's time to debate whether there will be a group or just an individual. It's time to debate. I'm not sure. I think that's a bot thing. I don't know. Sorry, I don't think it's a bot, but I mean, the question is just not coherent. I'll just move on. To Nur Hilalia from Polanka. What if the speakers speak under 7 minutes and don't get any POI from the opposition team? Will it affect the score for both teams? No, again, no penalties in terms of technicalities other than contents. Can we get this PPT later? I guess I already mentioned that, yes, we will provide this. So don't worry. In the case from Farid, in the case where the PM or LO did not adequately set up the debate or proposal, would it be justified for the from the member of government or member of opposition to take up the burden instead during the closing debate? So technically you can do it, but yeah, let's just say that technically you can do it. You're not encouraged to do it because I guess it depends on the context of the motion, right? Let's say, what do you mean by setup or the proposal? If you're talking about the mechanism, everything else, I guess in that case, usually closing teams are discouraged to bring new mechanisms because opening teams cannot engage and therefore it makes the debate unfair. But at some contexts, closing teams can introduce new alternatives or possibilities of how the mechanism can take place. So technically, again, depending on the context. Next is from Elvisius. Pardede, what if the speakers speak less than 7 minutes? We already addressed this. Can we bring a paper while on debate? Already addressed this as well. What will be a sort of adjudicator test shared later? You will see when it's released, so just take your time. Next is from Josh. If accent isn't concerned, could he use slang? Well, slang is a very specific thing that not everyone might understand what is the meaning, so you're not encouraged to use slang, especially if that slang has negative connotation. Remember that this is a government event, so you need to maintain decorum at all times. Next question is from Dita Moriska. How judges know whether a team is cheating or not? Let's say the argument is from Google. Usually, like you can find out from the structure or the wordings of it. Usually if people cheat from Google, it's very noticeable because they sound like they're reading something, like the awkward pauses when they struggle to pronounce certain words, because usually when they read articles or when they read like, for example, journals or papers, there are a lot of, I would say, words that are rarely used in your usual setting in, let's say, English as a foreign language country like Indonesia. So it's very noticeable. But I guess the easiest way for you to understand, to know if a team is cheating or not, what I usually do as a judge, if I have suspicions, I will just type what they just said, and then I go to Google, because as a judge, I can do that if I want to be sure, right? And then if I found a hit, then I'll just report it to the core education team. But yeah, if you found the case as if you found that to be the case as the judge, do not just attack the team. Do not just say that, hey, I know you're cheating. Report it to the adjudication core and also to the equity team. Okay, so do not confront the team directly. Next is from Yasmin Khair. We have a lot of questions, but I guess it's until 11:30, so we're good. So what to do for first timers? Simple. Read these briefings, watch a lot of debates online, and that would be a great start. Next is from Keisha. While having a debate in our team, can we switch speaker's position? Like, my friend is a leader and can she be second speaker? Well, obviously, as long as that person has not spoken, you can switch anytime you want. But if you decide to switch, again, assuming that both speakers have not spoken, and if you decide to switch, just make sure that you let the judge know, because the judge needs to fill in the scoring ballot. So make sure that they are aware that you're going to change. Yeah. Next question from Ilham Duananda. The British parliamentary debate competition system, will there be a verbal evaluation? Yes, there will be. Next is Sakar. How to not panic during case building? This is a very good question, because I still panic a lot as well. But I guess the reason that why we are panicking, I believe it's largely because we're not sure what to do. We're unsure of whether or not we can be good at it. or whether or not we are sure about what are we going to say in the debate. So my suggestion to everyone is that you are here for a reason, that you are selected by universities, you are trusted or whatever it is, but you have a reason that why you're here, which means that you're already more than capable to actually believe in yourself, that you don't have to panic. You just need to calm down, take a deep breath, and then reread the motion. Because sometimes when we are panicking, it's because we don't understand what the topic will be or what it is or what are we going to say in the speeches. But what matters is for you to just focus on what matters. In that case, what is the thing that the motion specifically ask? Then I'll just address that, right? So believe in yourself, read the motion, take a deep breath. That's it. No secret recipe or whatever. Some people do have like more confidence than the others because they're accustomed to public speaking. They're accustomed to sharing their thoughts for so long. But technically, you can be that person as well. So do not allow yourself to tell that you're not good enough in giving your speeches, because you are definitely more than good enough. Everyone here, and that applies to everyone here. So yeah, another thing, I guess, since this question is very, to a certain extent, personal as well, I think it's a very good question. Talk with your teammate, because your teammate should be, again, your partner, right? And then your partner should be the person that can comfort you as well. So before you go into the tournament, have a conversation between both of you. Like, if you're having panic attack, what should your partners do? Should they comfort you? Should they, or let's say, bring you food or whatever, just to make sure that you have better dynamics as well as a team. Teamwork and you comforting each other is a very good way to also address panic attacks. Next question is from Adam Kusuma, and we have 95 more messages. Interesting. Hopefully we can address this in 30 minutes. If not, you can always ask in the group. Yeah. So how do judges know that debaters are using devices while case building? So technically, you will find out because in the tournaments, well, if it's regional, obviously we don't know. We're just going to give you benefit out of doubt. Unfortunately, we have to tell you that. But again, if you're cheating using Google, we're definitely going to find out. So do not underestimate the capabilities of our tech team. They're very cool, and they can find out if you are cheating. Well, technically, judges can too. But yeah. Next is from Riksandi Izanugraha. Is personal experiences acceptable to support their arguments? If the question is acceptable, then it is. But again, the same reason that why we cannot just say statistics can be a debate winning argument is just the same. The reason that why we cannot say that statistics will always be a debate winning argument is because statistics do not always represent a vast majority of groups of people that we're talking about. So technically, it's not representative. Same thing, your personal experience could be used to explain the emotionality part, or why then it is indeed, or if it's something that's not just you who experience it, but you happen to have experienced it as well, then you can do that. But technically, again, we're not strongly against that. But you just need to make sure that that is relevant, that it's applicable in the vast majority of instances. Because again, if it's fringe or if it's anomalous, then it's not going to be a debate-winning argument. Next is from Marvel Wijaya. If for whatever reason I don't have any knowledge in emotion, is there any way at least I can survive the debate? Is there a logical mechanism I could use to make any arguments? So the first thing that I would like to mention here is that we obviously understand and we know that there are debaters of various level of experiences in this tournament. So we're going to make sure that the topics we're going to provide are as accessible as possible. That's the first thing. The second thing, even if, let's say, it's already accessible by our standards, for example, and then some speakers are still not familiar about the topic, I guess in that case, what you can do is to just, yeah, the logical mechanism that you could use is to just probably assess to a certain extent why this is bad from the perspective that you are familiar with. Again, if you're using the example of private education, for example, if not exactly sure how private education works or how the companies make money out of it, for example, you can just say that why then the concept of education is not, should be, let's say, governed by the state or whatever, just something that you're familiar with. So that should be enough as well. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to win the debate. You could still win the debate. Another question about whether or not the slide will be sent to the WhatsApp group. And thank you to the one who commented. I think so. They mentioned it a lot. Thank you for paying attention. Next, how do judges know that debaters are using devices while case building? Already answered this as well. I'm sorry if I was presumptuous to ask this. It's from Pambudi. But will there be some kind of category or scope that will be used as a motion so that we can find the right material without cheating during the debate? Okay, do not frame it as if we make the topic so hard, then it justifies you cheating. No, all right? So that framing is dangerous. So in that case, just don't cheat for whatever reasons. Whatever the topic is, like we mentioned, we're going to be very careful of assessing the different level of people in terms of experiences, in terms of comfort as well. So we're definitely going to take accessibility into account. But even if it's too difficult, because we cannot make everyone happy, right? We cannot be certain that whatever we are sharing in the motion means that it's going to make, let's say, be accessible to everyone. We're not sure. So my suggestion to everyone, read the news, follow things that have been, let's say, circulating around the internet, probably talking about Trump indictment. Probably you should also know about like some Western countries like France even wanting to stop using US dollars as a foreign reserve. Read the headlines. No, I mean, don't just read the headlines. Read the whole news, but read the news that is making the headlines. So at least you know what is generally going on in the world. Okay. But whatever it is, do not cheat. Next, from Jovita Anggun, I want to ask, how do we build a strong argument? Do we have to include laws? I think we already addressed this. These are the 3 burdens that you can do to explain and to be persuasive or to win a debate. You have to elaborate the likelihood of your claims, of your logical analysis. You have to address the key issues asked by the motion, and you have to compare your teams with the other teams in this debate to really be sure why you should get the first in this debate. Again, you can bring laws, you can bring data, you can bring whatever, but in that case, just make sure they are relevant. It's not relevant to just say, we cannot do this because this data says this. The question is, why then the data should be like the like Hail Mary or the almighty point that we should all abide by. Next question from Yasmin Khair. Is there a product we have to come up with in the end of the debate session? Your product should be your speech, but at the end of the debate session, you are not expected to produce anything, I guess, aside from giving feedback to the judge, like submitting feedback to the judge later. If that's the question, I'm not exactly sure. Feel free to clarify later. Next is from, again, James Byrne on a role of whip. They need to summarize the debate. Should they answer every point on every speaker, or should they give a speech where the main point were to give the broader point of each team and give bias? So this already comes back to the style of whip speeches. And whip speeches throughout my debating experience have different styles. And it's always about comfort. Again, as long as you're able to summarize, as long as you can compare, as long as you can prove that why your team fulfills the logical burden, fulfills the motion-based burden, and are very clear about all of them, then whatever works for you should work, okay? And judges should not punish you for having different styles of doing whip speeches. So if, let's say, you think it's easier for you to answer every point, which is technically almost not impossible, I guess, but very, very unlikely to necessarily succeed all the time, then do it if you're comfortable. If you're comfortable more with summarizing their broader point or like their deductions of the arguments, then do it as well. Just make sure that you really tackle the core of your opponent's issue. That's the case if you're talking about responses, yeah? Next, someone asked for slangs. We already answered this. Sarcasm allowed? Technically, yes, but do not be rude. This is the most important part. Sometimes people cannot, like, here's the thing. When people are being sarcastic, I'm also a naturally sarcastic person, if you haven't noticed as well, with a lot of my cusps and everything else. I guess in that case, what you think as funny, if you're being a sarcastic person, some other people might not find it funny. They might be offended by it, right? So by that virtue alone, do not be sarcastic. So I guess I'll take back my statement. But again, if it's just for the lols or it's just for the fun without necessarily offending anyone, then you can do it. But just do not, again, cross any line of being disrespectful, of not being nice or being decent to other people. So yeah, but again, the reason that why BP is BP is because of being persuasive, right? BP, being persuasive. That's what I call it. But in that case, if let's say your sarcasm does not help you in being persuasive, ask yourself, will this help me in being persuasive? And again, being persuasive refers to this three things that I just mentioned: fulfilling the burdens while still playing within the rules. And if it doesn't help you in being persuasive, then probably you might want to refrain from doing that. Debaters are allowed to switch position? No, you are allowed to switch speaker position. If both of you have not spoken, you can switch. For example, in the start of the debate, you are leader of a position, but then you want to switch to deputy leader of a position, and assuming that your partner agreed and both of you have not delivered your speech, then yes, can. But if we are referring to position OG, OO, CG, and CO, cannot. It's already predetermined by the tab. Okay. How many debate in one day? I think we have addresses as well. Please read the pedoman. Next, Stephanie, can we use our mobile phone just to do time keepers or stopwatch? Yes, you can do that. But most of the time, the judges will also use a stopwatch on their own, so you can also refer to theirs. Next is from Putra. Hi, Omar. About this house prefers or this house regret type of motions, do speakers need to bring their mechanism or just reasons or arguments? Technically, reasons and arguments only, because in this house prefers or this house regret motion, you cannot mechanize things. You cannot mechanize. You cannot prove a mechanism because, again, you are just imagining either a new history or a new world, right? Which means that what you can do is to just explain the likely history or the likely turn of events that would happen, the likely reality that you're going to live, but you cannot always say that this is how it will be. You have to explain why it's likely. I hope that answers. Next question is from Nico Alexander. How deep do you have to elaborate your points or arguments? The answer is simple, as deep as possible, again, but depending on these three burdens: logical burden, motion-based burden. If you think that you have answered all of those questions, wait, is what I'm saying true? What are the factors that could help my case to be true or more solid? Then basically ask yourself a lot of questions. Whether or not you are satisfied with the answers, then probably you know that, okay, it's enough. For example, yeah. Next is from Alia Shauki. Will the team who's currently speaking get a minus score if they keep rejecting POI? No minus score in BP, so yeah. But if you're not accepting POIs and we notice that it's a close debate, like Faliani has mentioned, we can have a lot of, let's say, not a lot of, we can see whether or not the debate could go either way, and therefore POIs, if accepted, actually could make a different decision. So that's why POI is important. Can we use dictionary while debating? So technically, yes, but we would just say that feel free to use words. You don't have to always use big words, right? Use the words that you're familiar with, and that's fine. Does grammar take priority? Not necessarily, because what is being assessed as persuasive is your case or your content, not necessarily your grammar or your English skills. But I think in this instance, yeah, no, I don't think there's an instance. That answer, yeah, that should answer the question. Next is from Rainesta Mikaela Indri. Just to make sure there is no prepared motion, yes, moving on. Their motions will be based on international issues. Let's see. But yes, just read things that make the headlines. It will help. For duration of speaker, is it 7 minutes or 7 minutes 20 seconds? 7 minutes, but you can have 20 minutes grace 20 seconds grace period. Anything more than that, you're not going to let's say we're not going to take notes of what you're saying. Do you have any tips to deal with anxiety and nervous in facing NUDC? I think I addressed this a little bit, that of course it's always going to be nerve-wracking, especially as your first time, especially if you're not familiar with debating, if you're not exactly sure of how it's even going to be, right? And I think everyone has gone through that. I think in that case, let's have a separate conversation later on. But I guess my personal tips would be, again, to remember that you're here for a reason, because sometimes that nerve and anxiety stems from our self-doubts. So I think that address those self-doubts. What make you doubt yourself? Is it because you believe that you haven't read enough? Then read enough. Is it because you're not familiar enough with debating? Then familiarize yourself with debating. Watch debates online, right? So try to understand that inner voice, why you are being anxious, what makes you doubt yourself, and why then you want to, let's say, grow out of it, and things that you can control, basically. So my personal mantra is that whatever you can control, do your best. What you cannot control, stop overthinking. So in that case, if your anxiety is related to things that you can control, then do your best to get out of it. But if it's something that you cannot control, you're worried about the results, you're worried about how, let's say, your university will react. Can you control that? Not necessarily. So I will just stop overthinking. And I hope that answers. But yeah. Next question. But I love how supportive everyone here in the comments regarding those questions. So thank you so much for a lovely reminder that humans are nice. But anyway, next, how could we make a good setup, by the way? Depends on the motion, depends on the context. There's no one size fits all answer, but basically a setup is a good setup if it covers the grounds that why then the motion should be implemented, or why then the motion should be good to, let's say, be assessed in a way that the motion asks, right? Sorry, 1 second. So that's why the best answer to know whether or not you have make a good setup is to really ask yourself if those setups set the groundworks for your arguments or your future contents in this debate. So basically, that's my suggestion. Next question. Hello, morning. I want to ask about prep time. Do you have any tips for debaters when they're preparing their chosen words or whatever they want to say during the debate so they can maintain to stay relevant? Again, being relevant to the motion rarely has anything to do with, let's say, your words, or I guess in that case, your English skills, vocab, and all of those things. But I guess my tips when you are prepping is to take a step back, see what the motion writes, right? Like, what are the things that the motion expects you to answer? Again, if we're using those examples of this household ban private universities, then the motion expects you, if you're a government, to at least explain why it's something that needs to be done to the point that it needs to be banned, right? So that's why those are the things that you want to focus on first. So that's my tips in terms of approaching prep. Focus on the right questions, and the right questions will lead back to what the motion is asking. So that's how you can stay relevant to the motion. Another question. Hai Kak, dalam 15 menit ketika mosi sudah diberikan, apakah nope, you're not allowed to browse at any point in the tournament, okay? But some people are talking in the comments, so let me see. Yes, you can use Google to make your argument. It's not allowed, 100% not allowed. I'm going to say it a lot of times. No Googling at any point of the tournament. So how can we get more information without browsing? Read from now. Make yourself available, familiar with things that are going on in the world. Do not be ignorant. Do not be oblivious to how things are. So do that. No browsing, and do not use it as an excuse. We do not know, so we're going to browse. No browsing is allowed at any instances, no matter how difficult it is, right? So same thing with you doing a test. If you are in, let's say, in your midterm or in your final, if you say that this is too difficult for me, then probably it's because either you didn't study enough or because you just want to use it as an excuse to browse for information. your lecture will not allow that, right? Which means that in this case, familiar yourself with different topics. So there are concerns regarding how do we, let's say, can get theoretical study and everything else. Like we mentioned, we're going to make sure the topics are accessible. It's not going to be like a super deep research or super deep topic that a lot of researchers are still researching on. We're definitely not going to do that, because in that case, the chief education panel will not necessarily be familiar with those things as well. So what I want everyone here to remember and to also, let's say, internalize is that do not worry about all of these topics, but for whatever reasons, no browsing at all, okay? Yes, the only thing that is allowed is printed medias, right? Yeah, printed medias. If you have, let's say, printed a journal that you read today and you believe it's going to be useful in the tournament 2 weeks or 3 weeks from now or whenever, you can use that. You can use that in prep, but you cannot bring that during your speech. And like I said, some people are joking about whether or not judges are Chennayang. They kind of are. And technically, there are also a lot of technologies to know if you're cheating, if you're browsing as well. We're not going to share you what, because then, but anyway, I think you can, familiar. So yeah. So most of the texts are actually in this thread, basically. But yeah, I think I already answered all of them. Yeah. Some people are joking. That's good. Socialize with one another. It's very fun to see people socializing. But yeah, no online browsing, printed materials only during prep, not during speech. Judges can actually find out. Do not justify cheating. If it's too difficult for you, then I suggest you to read. I guess that sums everything up about the thread. Someone asked, will the moderator say istirahat sejenak? Well, if you read the schedule, istirahat is at 11:30. So in that case, we're going to keep going until 11:30, or at least until we have answered all of the question. I'm sorry, what if we accidentally use bahasa a little bit in our speech? It's fine. Again, I believe it's Indonesian, not bahasa, because bahasa means language. But I guess in that case, it's fine. If it's accidental slip up, you're not going to have your scores reduced. But if you decide to use Indonesian throughout your speech, then you're probably in the wrong competition. That should be Kademi. All right, can we use slangs? This is a very popular question, but I guess it's from the same person. I already addressed that. When is the national competition held? I believe it will be in June. Yeah, I think, not I think, I know it's in June, in Pedoman, yeah? Hi, for your explanation, I get it and very clear, but I have a special question for you. What techniques to be a winner in this competition? How we as a team has to prepare material for us, etc. So in that case, there's no one size fits all to win a tournament. So if you can see that one of the CAP members, like two of the CAP members, are past winners of NUDC. We have Hans, who won last year, and we also have Faliani, who won the 2020 edition of NUDC. And if you can see that they have completely different styles and they have completely different ways of conveying their message or their contents in the debate. Yeah, sure, the motion is different, I guess. But even from the way they, let's say, present, not just themselves, but their case in general are very different, right? So there's no one size fits all for me to say this is the correct way to win the tournament. But I guess the closest thing that I can say, that we can say as the chief education panel, that the best way for you to try to win is to be as persuasive as possible. And in that case, understand the burdens that are expected from you as a speaker and from you as a team, depending on the motion. If you're able to address the motion in its core, if you're able to, let's say, explain why your case is very relevant, then you are likely to win almost all rounds, okay? Prepare material. Reading news will necessarily help, but I wouldn't want you to assume that we're just going to use motions based on recent things that you can find online or that you can find on the news. It could be things that happened 10 years ago that are still relevant. So I think that news could be good for you to at least get yourself updated with recent issues, but it doesn't always have to be about recent issues. So yeah. Next question, when the time is started, it's start from the beginning we are speaking. Yes, the first word that you said will be when the timer is being counted, not when the MC is calling you, yeah? So when the MC calls you, the timer is not starting, but when you say your first word, we're going to start the timer. The easiest way to help us manage expectation in terms of time management is to just say, hello, I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1, then start your timer so everyone can at least have the same level of understanding the time you're at, yeah? Can you explain again about POI? Is it possible for debater to deliver more than POI during one turn? Let's go to POI. So technically, I believe the answer is yes, you can deliver more POI than more than one POI during the turn. So one POI for every single debater is a general rule of thumb. The speaker should at least accept one POI, but if they want to offer another POI, accept another POI, and you who just got accepted for a POI wants to offer again, as long as the person wants to give you that opportunity, then it's fine. Next, sorry if this has been asked before, but if we have reasonable concern during the debate that the other team is cheating, who should we voice our concerns to? To the judge and to the equity team. We're going to explain who is the equity team in the tournament, but it's either the judge or the equity team. You will know who your equity people are. So eventually, it's only those two people that you can flag your concerns. The third person is, I guess, the chief adjudication panel, or basically myself and the other, depending on the regions, yeah, because each region has different core adjudication panel. So what is a closed debate? Could you give us an example? This would require me to look back at the debate that I've watched. A lot of them, I guess. But closed debate is basically when like the contributions are very, very similar in terms of being so persuasive that it's very hard for judge to understand, because closed debate can be like a very good debate where you're not exactly sure how do they come up with all those ideas, and therefore it's very tough to understand, okay, who is the winning team, because it's a very high quality debate. But closed debate could also be like I would say quote unquote bad debate, where speakers, for example, do not respond to each other. They do not necessarily have a good process analysis to prove their arguments. So in that case, it could be a closed debate. So I hope that kind of answers. How about the topic of this debating? Could be anything. If you take a look at past NUDC's videos on YouTube, you can see that we always have different topics from each round, even from each year, not just from each year, but even in the same year, each round, we're going to have different topics. If you were to want it, this judge, okay, is it mandatory for judge to give personal feedback? Yes. So if, let's say, a judge, because it's a government event, they are expected to also help you, and they're strongly encouraged to always help you. So if, let's say, you approach them and they're not responding, tell the chief adjudication panel so we can address this. If, let's say, they're not responding to you, yeah. I'm going to try to be quick because we only have 7 minutes left. Do you have any tips to prepare argument as fast as well? Here's the thing. An argument, or at least a persuasive argument, does not have to be like numerous, in a way that if you think that the more arguments you have, then the more likely you're going to win. It's a wrong mindset. One team could have just one argument, but it's very detailed, very strong process analysis. They could still win the debate. So do not see it that you need to complete your argument as fast as possible. What you need to do is like how to complete the argument as deep as possible, not as fast as possible. Yeah. So I hope that answers. Hi, Ka, I'm very curious whether speakers could inject a light humor. You could do that, but I guess reminder that if the humor is potentially offensive, then I would suggest you not to use light humor. But I personally like to insert light humor in my speeches every now and then, and thankfully no complaints from people being offended or everything else. So technically, yes, you can do that. It's not necessarily encouraged, but I always like being entertained in speeches, or in a debate round. So you can do that. But again, just make sure that it's not offensive or potentially disrespectful towards other people. Is not getting any POI a bad sign for a debater? Technically, yes, because it means that you refuse to engage with that person, because that person might have a legitimate question to you. They might want to get clarity as soon as possible. And now when they mention that, the reason why I asked that POI is because they're not very clear about this, and then you realize, oh yeah, I was not being very clear, and then it was already too late because it's no longer your turn. So accepting POIs is actually a very good strategy to understand what are they going to talk about, so you can actually predict the things that they're going to say and then say it right away in your speech to make the chance of them winning even lesser. Next, from Elvicius, excuse me, can we always reject POI or we have to accept? Technically, the rule says that it's encouraged for everyone to at least take one POI, right? So in that case, take one at least. Do not reject POIs. They could be good. They could actually work for you. Halo Kak, saya baru masuk, so I don't know the rules. So I want to ask, what is the rules for debate? Or what's the motion? I believe that this session is recorded. I'm not sure. I did hear that there's not sure. Regardless, we're going to share this slide, okay? So you can read the slide and you can always reach out to us if you're still not sure in terms of the content of the slides. Next, when is the date of NUDC again? Read the pedoman. Excuse me, the competition will be held as online or offline. Regionals online, nationals, I believe offline. So next, are there any rejections, limitations? But again, those are the things that have been provided in pedoman, yeah? If there are changes, BPTI will definitely let you know. Are there any rejections, limitations for us who got POI multiple times at once, or some rules that we should at least take one POI? I think people are worried more about POI, which is not a bad thing, I guess. So again, for POI, mana tadi? There you go. POI rules-nya 15 seconds if accepted, yeah? If not accepted, that person who offered POI, sit down, wait for more 15 seconds if they still want to offer POI, okay? If that person still doesn't want to accept, then do the same until you are accepted, or until 6 minutes, whichever is sooner, yeah? So in that case, this is basically the slide that covers anything about POI. So is there any WhatsApp group for debaters? Yes, I'm going to go next. We only have 3 minutes left. Is there any debate exhibition today? So technically the debate exhibition has been recorded, so you can actually watch it. Yeah, we're going to give you the link. Is there any way I can watch this video again? Yeah, it's being live streamed. Oh yeah, it is being live streamed, I believe. In YouTube. So I think people have been sharing the link, so that's good. What does N1 have to do in debate? You are a judge, so you are technically judging. So that's why that you are being assessed, which we're going to cover later in the judge briefing after Ishoma. I believe it's happening at 1 p.m. Waktu Indonesia Barat, so please stand by. So we're not going to present our motion in a video, but in a Zoom meeting. So it means we're going to do debate with our team, not by herself. I'm not exactly sure what the question implies, but technically you can deliver the speech on your own if, let's say, it's through Zoom and your partner is not around, or let's say you guys are not debating in your school or in university, but you just decided to debate in your own homes. Technically, that you can still do that, right? That you can prep with your teammate in the breakout rooms that we are likely going to provide, or if not, you can use the different modes of communication. So yeah. I'm not sure about the second part. That is the question from Ashila Rahman Nabila, by the way. Next question from Suchiwati. Can we ask for background behind the motion when the motion is announced? Again, we are going to provide info slide if we think it's necessary, but if you do not provide info slide, we would assume that it's a general information, and therefore questions related to background or context, we're probably not going to provide that. Unless it's very important, which is likely for us to provide an info slide. Is the debate pre-recorded or live? Well, everything is live. What you see on Zoom or what you see on YouTube, is obviously it has to be recorded first, but the debate was live. Okay, so it's already 11:30. I will just address the last question. Kak, when will we know about the topic? 15 minutes before the debate. So we still have a lot of questions that is not being answered, I believe, because there are a lot of them. Feel free to address them, and then in the WhatsApp group or in any like modes of transportation, sorry, communication that you can think of, and we're more than happy to address them. So I guess that's the end for the debaters briefing. Thank you so much for listening. We're going to share the slides later on. So I hope you guys have a good Ishoma. And before we continue at 1 p.m. Waktu Indonesia Barat. Right. So it's a break now. I'm returning this to the MC. But if not, let's just have a break. Thank you, everyone. Silakan, Mbak Farah.
Thank you, Omar. Okay, guys. So again, thank you to Omar and then Kaliani and Deta for everything you guys have been have conveyed in the seminar. So guys, thank you for staying with us. It's time for break for 90 minutes. So we're gonna be back at 1 p.m. WIB. So the Zoom will stay open. And remember, everyone, the seminar and accreditation is being live streamed in YouTube and also recorded. So don't worry, you can also access it later. But please stay here for the next agenda, which is education and seminar and accreditation. So yeah, and thank you, everyone, and see you soon at 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Mbak.